We have to remember that what AI does is it automates tasks, or it makes our tasks that we need to complete a lot easier. But trust is human. Again, one of the pharmaceutical companies that we work with was using an AI tool that was able to flag a supplier's financial risk. That was really fantastic. It did exactly what it was supposed to do, but it was then our client that needed to run a collaborative process that, would, first of all, allow that supplier to trust them enough for them to be willing to renegotiate terms and figure out how they could all work together to solve the problem.
Thank you so much for joining another edition of The Never-Ending Climb for Stronger Supply Chain and Procurement. With me today, we have the pleasure of being joined by Caitlyn Lewis. And Caitlyn is the founder, CEO of Supplier Day, and Supplier Day is founded on the premise that how you communicate will help you achieve your goals, and that buyers and vendors really need to communicate so much better. Caitlyn, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this all day.
Right on. When we were talking, there's this idea that somehow the CFO cares more about your suppliers than you do in procurement. And this is sometimes related to the way supply chain or procurement is measured that can create some unfortunate side effects. Let's talk more about that.
Absolutely. Happy to. And, as you said, founded Supplier Day on the sort of fundamental belief that how you communicate will determine whether or not you achieve your goals. And really, what are goals if they're not that thing that you're measuring to tell you that you're doing really, really well? And I think that what we are seeing more and more is that there is a really big difference between what CFOs are measuring and what CPOs are measuring or being measured on. And at the end of the day, CFOs care about value. There was a 2024 Gartner study that found that 40% of supply chain disruption stem from poor supplier relationships. And those can cost companies an average of, $10 million upwards per incident. And so CFOs are starting to see that suppliers can be risk multipliers. If they have weak relationships, then there's a lot of financial volatility associated with them. And so they're really pushing CPOs and asking things like, hey, come on, why are we losing millions because of delays or penalties when we should be building strategic partnerships with these suppliers, and that can prevent it? But procurement teams are then being measured on and are focusing on squeezing margins. So exactly to your point, they're treating suppliers as vendors. They're treating them really transactionally, and they're just trying to win based on cost. Whereas CFOs are looking at the bigger picture around EBITDA, and they're seeing a big opportunity there to be building much stronger relationships with suppliers.
What I love about that is the emphasis on EBITDA over time, as opposed to the 1-year cost savings. One of my most favorite examples of this is one of the chemical companies that, through a significant supply chain disruption, did not take the traditional cost myopic approach. They took the approach of, I don't care what the cost is, ship me double. All other competitors were saying, don't you dare increase prices more than CPI. And guess who actually had the product that the sales team needed to sell? And guess who doubled their market share? Because they were thinking more broadly than the individual transaction. And I think that is such a brilliant example of how it is absolutely contradictory in the way the two teams are often measured. And where the supply chain or procurement team reports to the CFO, there's often some overlap. But where a CEO has a direct relationship with a procurement or supply chain team, and they say, cost savings, cost savings, cost savings without consistent, ratable, reliable supply, this creates some really, really unfortunate reactions. And I think CPOs, I'm surprised, and I think you are too, that they're not leading the charge to correct this.
100%. I couldn't agree with you more. And, I think that there's a lot of systemic reason that maybe constrain them from really leading it. Again, a CFO can say that they're looking at the bigger picture, they're looking at EBITDA, they want strategic partnerships, but we see it all the time. Then when you're supporting procurement teams to put together their budgets for their supplier engagement program, they're really on a shoestring. The company doesn't want to give up a lot of money because, again, procurement teams are measured on their cost savings. And I even speak to some of our clients who cannot get resources. They cannot get people working in the procurement function unless they are expressly associated with a supplier management and a supplier cost savings role. They literally have a target on their heads, almost like you would for a salesperson. And again, that's just so contradictory to that bigger picture. And so I guess, saying CFOs care more about this than CPOs do, it's a controversial line to take. They
It
do,
is.
but
It
as
is,
we
but it generates discussion, right?
exactly. Yeah. And, I think that it's then the role of a CPO to help support a CFO, a COO, a CEO into, well, this is what it's going to take to shift into a strategic partnership model. And we've seen it be really, really successful with some of our clients. They've been stuck in these like short-term gain cycles of renegotiating contracts all the time, to shifting that relationship into co-development, co-developing tools with suppliers, really working on what both supplier and client needs. And you can see them cutting, things like downtime costs by really significant percentages, where you can then take those to your CFO and show them how these kinds of relationships are supporting them in protecting their recurring revenue. Then they suddenly start to care. But I think, and again, back to that point around language and communication, CPOs aren't quite talking that same language as their CFOs are, or they are also stuck in that transactional mindset, and then they lose credibility, and therefore they lose budget to go and do these things.
One of the things that I imagine we would agree as a significant risk to that supplier relationship is an over-index in the next few years that we need to protect against on AI. Because if you over-index on AI, then we can look at examples of when you submit this was inappropriate on social media, or a comment that's automatically flagged as inappropriate when actually in the context was actually just funny or sarcastic. That creates a significant risk of overly automating the relationship as opposed to the transactions. How would you invite folks to help protect the humanity and to go slow to go fast?
I love that concept or that phrase, and we say it all the time, and again, it's kind of like back to that humanness. We have a lot of clients that are coming to us slightly late, that, their events happening quickly, they don't have time to wait. And we always kind of make them slow down a bit because we really want to understand what it is that they're trying to achieve. And once we've got that under our belts, then we can move really, really fast. And I think that it's the same thing with AI. We have to remember that what AI does is it automates tasks, or it makes our tasks that we need to complete a lot easier. But trust is human. Again, one of the pharmaceutical companies that we work with was using an AI tool that was able to flag a supplier's financial risk. That was really fantastic. It did exactly what it was supposed to do, but it was then our client that needed to run a collaborative process that, would first of all allow that supplier to trust them enough for them to be willing to renegotiate terms, and figure out how they could all work together to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really, really important, that AI is never going to help you build trust. Yes, it might help you build credibility because, hey, having to go through that onboarding process was not half as painful as it has been since we can all remember, or getting that PO raised or getting that payment out of the client actually was relatively plain and simple and straightforward. And wow, that was so nice. But, you know, we've worked with some clients that were amazing in terms of all of those things. But the trust was not there, or it was a really hard task to try and build the trust for us to be able to go and do our best work. And I think that that's what a lot of procurement functions are going to have to figure out in order to become really competitive and to essentially become, you know, a customer of choice. And again, you've got to relate that to, well, what would a CFO care about? How do we put this into the language that a CFO would care about? You say something like trust, maybe it sounds too fluffy. But what if we started to talk about agility? And really, you can only be agile if you trust the teams that you're working with to go with you on the journey. And we were talking about it before we pressed play, you know, that there were companies that could pivot a lot faster during the pandemic. And that meant that they were able to, you know, save a lot of money around logistics costs, around supply costs. And that's again because they were agile and because they had trust. And so I guess you have to remember that tech without humanity is just data. And, you know, data doesn't renegotiate contracts or build relationships.
The idea that the language that we use, the feelings that we create to build and reinforce trust, the behaviors that we execute consistently enough on both sides that leave a vendor feeling like they are a valued supplier, as opposed to a vendor that has two pistols pointed at their feet. And you'd better dance when we say dance, because one will engender trust and a rally to help support, and one will engender a, sorry, busy. Listen, this other customer that we've got a great relationship with, they treat us like a supplier. We're going to go work with them instead. And it's, in a sense, natural. And we talk about doing a friends audit in our personal lives, but, you know, businesses do supplier and vendor audits very similarly. And in spite of, and I love the example you used of a supplier that had a flag from a financial side of things that turned into a negotiation that created a positive outcome for both organizations, as opposed to what could otherwise be an automatic reaction of, well, shut that supplier down and off we go, we'll find a new one, which in and of itself can be significantly more expensive from a cost of change. So if we back it up into the language and the feeling that we need to make sure is created and engendered and reinforced and supported between suppliers and buyers, what does good look like in your experience?
I think that there has to be an authenticity to how procurement teams are communicating with their suppliers. You know, and again, I think that the more senior you get in an organization, the more those leaders are willing to be really, really honest, and suppliers genuinely appreciate that. You know, they never want to walk into a supplier event or even just a quarterly business review to hear their client talking about how great they are and how amazing they are, and look like they've never held a mirror up in front of themselves and be really honest about where they also need to improve.
It's like the customer that says, well, why aren't you absolutely excited for the privilege of serving us?
Exactly.
This is not the right attitude to start the conversation with.
Exactly. So there has to be an authenticity, but also an appropriate level of humility and, you know, an appropriate level of respect. And again, I think that this can come more naturally for leaders because they see this and they inherently understand it, and they're not too worried about looking bad or vulnerable to admit that they have faults or flaws or that their organization isn't great at everything. And I think that, you know, a lot of these companies would also do well to remember that some of their suppliers are way bigger than them. And actually the spend that our client has with them is like tiny, tiny, tiny.
Yeah.
So actually, they're not
Or
as
the
big and
circular
wonderful as they think they
relationship
are.
where
Yeah,
the supplier is the customer is the,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
100%. I would then say, secondly, there has to be a willingness to listen. And in fact, one of the values that we have within the Supplier Day and for our team is that great communication starts with listening. Um, you've got to really be there actively listening to what someone is telling you and wanting to genuinely understand the point that they're trying to make in order for you to communicate with them more effectively. I think that that's something that procurement teams do unbelievably badly, if I'm being very honest.
Typically,
you know,
especially if they've been
yeah,
trained on that. How much did you save us this week?
exactly right. And I think that again, then linked to that is a strong follow up. I think that you have to stop treating your suppliers like they're really naive or have never heard you say all of these things that you're saying to them today before. They've heard it all before. They've heard it from your competitors. They've heard it, from their clients. They've heard it from their suppliers. So, don't BS them. And the only way they're really going to believe anything you're saying and they're really going to believe that you listened and you heard them was if you follow up on the things that you said you would follow up on. And you do it in a mindful way. You do it in a way that, you can sustain and in a way that is really going to help to build and evolve the relationship beyond just one really inspiring CPO who's prepared to, put his head above the water and do something amazing. So I'd say those three are the most important things when it comes to that communication and setting yourself apart.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
when we have seen examples of a supply chain that gets tighter and stronger because of the relationships where those transactions are automated to a level that many aren't ready to imagine yet, I would suggest that that is what good looks like. And it really happens when there's the strong relationship, the shared language, the shared values, and the mutual respect and a healthy dose of humility that comes with it. I think this is some of the most beautiful ways to create the stronger supply chain. And in the absence of humility, how could it be a representation of the best of humanity?
100%. I couldn't agree with you more. Again, it's something that sometimes even I have to remind myself of is when we're designing these events. Yes, we're talking about the companies that are attending and we're talking about our client as the company that's hosting the event, but we're really there to create an amazing experience for people. And
Yeah.
that's what we have to remember.
Brilliant. Caitlyn, thank you so very much for joining us today, for sharing your wisdom around building stronger supplier relationships. And I know that anybody that would like to get in touch with Caitlyn, she's easy to find on LinkedIn. Feel free, and I would encourage you to reach out to go and help build stronger relationships, whether they are automated or not. Thank you so much, everybody. This has been another edition of The Never Ending Climb for a Stronger Supply Chain and Procurement.